Good afternoon, welcome, and thank you all for joining us today for this high-level European conference called Digital Sovereignty, Which Strategy for Europe? I am Jessica Galisser, Studies Manager at the think tank Renaissance Numérique, and I will be taking care of the housekeeping during this event. We will start in a few moments, and as always, I guess people will be joining us as we go. But I just want to take this opportunity to thank you all for joining this conference, and especially the speakers who have kindly accepted to share their views with us during the upcoming debates. Now I won't be very much longer because we have a great lineup and a lot of participants connected already. Maybe just one last word. Do not hesitate to communicate about the event using the hashtag digital sovereignty on social media to spread the debate a bit further. And now, without further ado, I give the floor to Nicolas Van Bremerge, who's a board member of Renaissance Numérique and CEO of the digital communications agency Spintank, for a quick introduction. Nicolas, the floor is yours for about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Just a few words on behalf of Renaissance Numérique, and I'm very pleased to welcome everyone to this conference. Let me first welcome and add a few thanks to the speakers. First, Monsieur le Ministre Clément Beaune, who will introduce this conference in a few minutes. He could not be with us today, but he's put the issue at the heart of the French presidency coming in 2022, and he will share his vision about a European strategy for digital sovereignty in a short introductory video. Big thank you to Major Schaake, who's long been in Brussels, who's now in Amsterdam, but works at Stanford, who's president of the Cyber Peace Institute and International Policy Director at the Cyber Policy Center at Stanford, who will introduce and help us frame this much debated notion of digital sovereignty. So big thank you, Major, for taking this time with us today. A lot of thanks to all the speakers, Anne-Marie Engoff-Larsen, Guillaume Poupard, Anna-Michelle Asimakopoulou, René Sommer, Thibaut Kleiner, Dragos Tudorache, Marie Ekland, and Corinna Schulze. It's really very nice to have you today with us to discuss this notion and to talk about strategy. And a big thank you also to Laura Kayali from Politico Europe and to Julien Ossetti from IFRI, who's also a member of Renaissance Numérique, for being the high-level moderators of this conference. Last few thank you notes to Henri Verdier, the French ambassador for digital affairs, and his team, who helped a lot set up this conference. And of course to Jennifer Chrétien, to Jessica Galisser, and Paul-Anne Lacombe, who did a tremendous job in setting up such a nice panel and making this conference happen. I have a few words to introduce the conference today. Europe's digital sovereignty is a topic that is at the heart of the work that we do at Renaissance Numérique at the think tank, because we focus on the citizen aspect of the digital transformation in all sectors of the economy and society. We've had the opportunity to touch upon this topic in many of our reflections already. Renaissance Numérique has started a specific working group on the topic in 2020 with very lively debates on this issue that was, as European sovereignty as a whole, raised during the pandemic. As we do when we have working groups on important topics at Renaissance Numérique, we work together with a very diverse crowd of members of the think tank, and we conduct a lot of interviews here at the national, European, and international levels. We hope we'll be able to publish conclusions and propositions at the end of the year on this topic. Sovereignty is a big word. It's a capacity. It's a capacity to express power and to decide about your future, about our future. The digital sector is not an easy field, as we all know, and digital sovereignty is a very complex issue that reaches intricate topics of security, of finance, of skills, of governance, of regulation altogether. There is a common ground already today, we think, to focus on the need to develop this European digital capacity to guarantee European sovereignty. What I would love for our panelists today would be to focus on strategy, not to talk too much about the concept in itself, but to really talk about how we can progress in our capacity, in our effective sovereignty. This requires us to express the right diagnosis, to identify our levels of dependency, to address where we are critically too dependent, where should we focus, what are the most acute technological layers we should address. This will be the topic of the first panel today. And then we need to talk about the way we can work on developing our sovereignty. What's our path? What fields and what paths should we focus on? So today I'm only asking you for one thing, dear panelists and the audience too. Try to get to the point, help us all focus, get to the matter, understand where the key problems are, where the key decisions should be made. Let us frame a strategy together. And let's be comfortable together too. We are a few hundreds today. We can't see the audience, but we will interact on social media. But we are all concerned, competent, smart, and willing to handle this complex issue. And I think the two panels today will be very rich and help this topic progress. So thank you again to everybody. And now, Jessica, the floor is yours back again.
It's a nice introduction. As you mentioned, France will be leading the presidency of the EU during the first semester of next year. And digital sovereignty will be one of the key focuses of this presidency. So with this in mind, we have asked French Secretary of State, for European Affairs, Clément Beaune, to share his views with us on this matter. Unfortunately, he could not be here live with us today, but he has recorded a short video for you to see. It's in French, but with English subtitles. So let's watch it.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis heureux de m'adresser à vous pour évoquer les enjeux de la souveraineté numérique européenne. La crise que nous avons vécue a été à bien des égards un révélateur et un accélérateur de l'importance du monde numérique, des outils numériques pour nous tous. À certains égards aussi d'une forme de dépendance européenne dans les solutions technologiques auxquelles nous avons recours, dans notre sécurité informatique ou numérique. La souveraineté tout court, la souveraineté numérique en particulier, est au cœur, plus encore qu'il y a un an, de nos réflexions d'après-crise. Et nous aurons dans quelques mois la présidence française de l'Union européenne, le premier semestre 2022. Et ces enjeux de souveraineté, les enjeux numériques, seront au cœur de cette présidence et de notre action. Je crois qu'il nous faut à cette occasion accélérer la mise en place d'un vrai modèle européen du numérique. Ce modèle, ça doit être notre équilibre fondamental d'Européens entre l'innovation et la régulation. Jamais l'un sans l'autre, parce que parfois nous avons le sentiment que l'Europe est faite pour réguler des innovations que les autres ont portées. Ce sont les deux que les Européens doivent réussir à porter en même temps. L'innovation d'abord, parce qu'il n'y a aucune raison pour que l'Europe soit vue, ou soit parfois réellement, le continent qui suive les autres, chinois ou américains, en matière d'innovation, en matière de nouvelles technologies. Nous avons, vous le savez, des réussites formidables. Un système, un écosystème de start-up, de plus en plus de scale-up qui se développe en France et en Europe. On doit en être fiers et les accompagner. Pour être très concret, nous le voyons dans le nouveau budget européen, nous augmentons nos financements en matière d'innovation, de numérique spécifiquement. Dans chaque plan de relance qui va être financé par l'Europe dans les prochains mois, il y aura au moins 20% des dépenses, 25% pour la France, consacrées à cette transition numérique et à son accélération. Et puis, bien sûr, la régulation. La régulation, ce n'est pas être en arrière de la main ou à l'arrière-garde de cette révolution numérique. Ce n'est pas la méfiance à l'égard de cet élan. C'est au contraire la volonté de préserver et d'inventer un modèle qui nous correspond. En matière de protection des données, l'Europe a été à la pointe avec ce règlement général de protection des données qui devient un standard international. Nous devons faire la même chose en matière de taxation, en matière de responsabilité des grands acteurs du numérique. C'est d'ailleurs une condition pour préserver la concurrence, l'ouverture, la montée en puissance de nos entreprises dans tous ces secteurs irrigués par le numérique. C'est exactement l'enjeu des textes européens portés par la Commission, le DSA et le DMA, qui visent à faire en sorte que la concurrence soit juste et que les contenus portés par les plateformes soient protecteur, en matière de protection des consommateurs, de lutte contre la contrefaçon, de lutte contre les contenus haineux ou à caractère terroriste par exemple. C'est cette économie sociale de marché adaptée au monde numérique que l'Europe doit inventer. Et je sais que nous pouvons compter sur vous pour nous apporter, en vue de la présidence française, des idées, des propositions, des critiques aussi, car l'Europe doit s'améliorer dans ce domaine. Mais nous pouvons réussir à forger ce modèle unique qui nous définit, qui est notre identité, aujourd'hui comme demain. Nous continuerons avec vous. Vous pouvez compter sur moi et je sais pouvoir compter sur vous.
We want to extend a warm thank you once again to Secretary of State Clément Beaune and to his team for having kindly accepted to register this short message for us and for taking the time to do it despite a busy schedule. I think this is a nice starting point for discussions today, but before we go all in, we thought it would be useful to try and set the scene with a proper introduction of the concept of digital sovereignty, which can be a bit obscure sometimes, and what it might mean for the European Union. And for this, I am glad to welcome Marietje Schaak, a member of the European Parliament between 2009 and 2019. She has been recognized as the ultimate digital MEP by Politico, which is not surprising. She is now International Policy Director of the Cyber Policy Center at Stanford University and President of the Cyber Peace Institute. Marietje, thank you very much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. And I'm happy to kick off this meeting on what I think is a challenge, the challenge of a solid digital strategy for Europe. And I think, unfortunately, and maybe this is helpful to keep in mind over the rest of your discussions, the term sovereignty as a frame is already quite contested, at least in the rest of the world. Maybe not in France, but it is elsewhere. And that, of course, does not change the legitimacy of the objective of ensuring that the EU is able to make decisions autonomously, independently, in its self-interest, but also based on the values and rights that it wishes to protect for its citizens. Those are legitimate and urgent questions. But undeniably, the term sovereignty, and in particular when it's related to the governance of technologies, was already claimed a little bit earlier by regimes with an authoritarian outlook. Now, I still understand the rallying cry and the political relevance in Europe, but it's important to understand what others might hear when they hear the term sovereignty. Because if the EU does not want to go in a protectionist or nationalist agenda, then what should it mean instead? Autonomy, okay, but let's try to get more specific. How far is the EU willing to go? Digital taxation? When President Macron hinted at that, there was an immediate and harsh threat in response from the United States. And in countries like the Netherlands or Luxembourg or Ireland, there are difficult questions to be answered about ending the tax havens within the EU itself. Other critical aspects that need to be discussed is the ability to develop entire supply chains within the EU or to guarantee access to rare earth materials for the production of IT products. Does the EU believe it can absorb a backlash if we were to more protect and close our markets? Now, I don't think that this closing of markets is the aim of those making the case for Europe's ability to deal with the most pressing challenges, but also gaps in the current global governance frameworks when it comes to developing and applying new digital technologies. So let's look at the substance first. There are a number of gaps if we look at how digital technologies are governed and clarity about who should do that. The context is, of course, the broader erosion of support for multilateralism and a lack of updates to existing national but also international organizations and institutions, and clarity about how to include rules for the digital world or to create new ones where they are needed. There are a lot of areas where there is not that type of clarity about how laws should apply. think about antitrust or competition. How should consumer harms be measured when products are free? How should the market be scoped? Is it a data market where all data that is assembled by different strands of a company, for example, take Google, it has search products, it has email products, it has maps and navigation products. Are we talking about email, search, and maps, or are we talking about one data market? Similarly, when we look at trade and rules-based trade, how should those rules apply to data flows and the reliability of supply chains? When we look at human rights law, where do digitally enabled surveillance fall domestically and internationally? And what role do we find acceptable for the private sector at all? It is clear that when we look at the digital world or the digital layer of our lives, that economic, strategic, and human rights matters are increasingly intertwined. It's really hard to separate them. So imagine the development of artificial intelligence. It uses data as an important source. How is that data collected? It's a human rights issue. The strength of an artificial intelligence market has big implications for a position of a country in the global economic arena, how competitive is a country or a company. And then, of course, there are strategic and also security aspects of the development of AI. For example, can it be properly secured? Should it be used in a military context? And how does a strength of one country versus the other play into the geopolitical competition? In other words, it's difficult to separate out these issues, and so a comprehensive strategy is needed to deal with some of these systemic questions. But on top of that, we see the blurring of lines. Think about the line between civilian uses and military uses of digital technologies, the so-called dual use technologies. What is unfortunate is that it took years for the EU to come up with an updated regulatory framework, while in the United States or in China, one single executive order changed the level playing field. So it changed the playing field between these three big global players. Similarly, if we look at the rules that exist also in the most difficult circumstances, when there's war, or hopefully when there's peace, what is needed to steer those rules in the right direction in the digital world? How do we avoid escalations of conflict, the use of the digital layer of our lives to become a new type of battlefield? How do we ensure there is no arms races, or that there is accountability after criminals or hostile state actors attack? Currently, the impunity with which aggressors act, whether they be criminal or geopolitically motivated, in and of itself undermines trust. If people do not see consequences for those who wage cyber attacks, then how are they supposed to rely on democratic governments and the international rules-based order? Those attacks and also the hybrid conflicts where disinformation plays an additional role are direct attacks on democracy, and they urgently need to be addressed. Now, there's an opportunity in cooperating, so reaching out to others, not isolating as the EU, to look at attribution of cyber attacks, so who should be held responsible, and then the accountability and sanctions process. What should be the consequences to waging such an attack? And I believe that this really needs to be a joint effort between like-minded nations that all wish to see the rule of law respected, whether it is at stake in the streets or in the digital world. Now, there are clearly fields where existing regulation is not sufficient or new laws are expected. In the space of transparency and accountability of artificial intelligence and its applications, questions about access to information, but also regulating biotech or data ownership. Now, clearly, one might say those are all covered by the new regulations that are underway from Brussels. And surely there is a lot happening. AI legislation, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, a Democracy Action Plan, Data Governance Act, an update to antitrust laws, indeed a lot of regulation. And when I travel, when I listen to people that are in the United States or in Asia, or people that work in the private sector, they also hear the various announcements of regulations. And I think there's an appreciation for the direction Europe wants to go. It wants values-based regulation, but I do see legitimate questions about how all those different pieces of the regulatory puzzle might fit together. How to avoid that nothing falls between the cracks, but also that the vision that Europe has is understood everywhere in Europe, or everywhere in the world, I'm sorry, also in Europe, actually, and that people cannot easily say, ugh, it's another day, there's another regulation coming out of the European Union. I think Europe is most helped now by critical reflection, no complacency. When I am in Silicon Valley, but also in Asia, there are many discussions about technology governance where the EU is not mentioned. And the risk of irrelevance or of a shrinking role is significant. And I want to remind everybody that I say this without any pleasure. I say this as a concerned European. Now, when we think about the EU's priorities to strengthen and also to promote its model of technology governance, to foster a rules-based international system, let's look further than the sort of pride that we have seen, for example, around the GDPR or the EU as a super regulator so far. You may have heard about the Brussels effect, the idea that rules made in Brussels ripple around the world and have an effect elsewhere. And I do believe it's a powerful effect, but it applies more to regulations of goods and services than I would imagine to data flows and technology in the future. We have to look beyond past successes. So there has been a lot of celebrating of the general data protection regulation, but I think there's also a risk that it has been oversold, even if there are still a number of challenges with the GDPR and also a lack of growth, for example, on the basis of those well-cherished values. There is the leaking of talent. We lose a lot of people and startups to Silicon Valley, other ecosystems, and that is not good for the EU's future. Then, moving on to the next point. Governing, especially when it comes to technologies, does not only happen through setting rules. It also happens through building new technologies, developing new business models, allowing for innovations to thrive, to grow, and to set their own standards. And here I believe that the EU and the US have a big problem, and that they have left a lot of room for the private sector to set standards, to make norms simply by the technologies that they develop. And so to now claim and reclaim in many ways strength as democratic nations in pushing for rules in the international order, it is a game of catching up right at a time when democratic nations are actually, unfortunately, under increasing pressure from authoritarian ones. In international fora, there's no guarantee that democracies will be able to have a majority around ideas that they would like to see. Now, before I conclude, maybe a few ideas of what I think could still be done in the EU and which should help make it more secure, more powerful, and more successful. One area is the gap between the single market in Europe and the need for considering national security risks. Currently, those two are at conflict with each other. There's a promise of a digital single market in Europe, but there are 27 different authorities to assess whether national security is at stake. We saw this with looking at whether Huawei and other network technologies were safe enough to use in Europe, and it was difficult to look with a national security lens at our single market because every government can make its own decisions. And at the same time, in the US, we see one White House executive order signed last week in order to make the United States more resilient. It was very urgent, but you can see that their pace can really make a big difference. On the global stage, who is speaking for Europe? Is it the High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, or is it Commission Vice President Vestager responsible for digital policies? I think it may help to think of which face and which leader, which voice is the most important, and maybe to appoint an envoy for digital affairs who can be the sort of global ambassador for the EU when it comes to everything digital. Then there is a need to bridge the gap between geopolitics and technology policies. Let me
Sorry, Maricha, I think you closed your microphone. We don't have the sound anymore. Okay, we have a small technical problem with the sound. So I guess we can, sorry, I will check if we can get Maricha's sound again. Okay, so while we solve the problem, I will now introduce the first debate on our first topic for today, which is where and at what level is the European Union dependent in the digital field? And maybe if we get Maritie's connection back later, she can answer a few questions and finish her talking points. So we will be taking questions from the audience during this debate. So do not hesitate to send your questions using the dedicated space on your screens. And to moderate this discussion, please welcome Laura Kayali. Laura is a policy reporter at Political Europe. Most of you probably follow her on Twitter. I know she's my go-to source when it comes to EU tech policy. So Laura, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, we talk a lot about digital sovereignty and the need to reach it, to pursue it. But on this panel, we're going to try and answer a question that is not that simple, but it is very important. Practically and concretely, where and at what level is the European Union dependent in the digital field? So it won't come as a surprise that the coronavirus pandemic has highlighted the European continent's dependencies. And one of the most high-profile examples lately is microchips, which impacts electronic devices, but also sectors which are further apart, such as car manufacturing. So in Europe, there are good news and bad news. The picture might not be as grim as we think, but there is a reality that cannot be ignored. According to the European Commission, the EU is overall less dependent on the US than vice versa, but both blocs have important dependencies vis-a-vis China. So when it comes to trade, the European Commission has identified computer and electronics in the top 5 extra EU dependencies for EU production. However, telecommunications, and machinery are areas where Europe is the least dependent. So you see, it's not only bad news. As the European Commission assessment of the EU's performance in key technologies, taking into account R&D, companies who perform, patents filed, shows that Europe performs better than China, the US, and Japan on areas such as advanced manufacturing, the Internet of Things, and mobility. However, Europe is a clear laggard on other areas such as artificial intelligence, robotics, micro and nanoelectronics, including chips, big data, and cloud. So in this panel, we will go more into detail when it comes to different areas. So we have today Anna-Michelle Aslikamopoulou, who's a member of the European Parliament, Anne-Marie Engoff Larsen, Denmark's tech ambassador, Guillaume Poupard, the Director General of ANSSI, France's cybersecurity agency, and René Sommer, Director of Government and Industry Relations at telecom company Ericsson. So let's start with you, Anna Michelle Asikamopoulou. So lately in Brussels, the main focus was on artificial intelligence because the European Commission came up with a strategy. How is this a sovereignty issue for the European Union? Oh, I think we cannot hear you.
Let's try this now. That's okay?
Oh yeah, it's working now. That's great.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Thank you to Renaissance Numérique for organizing this event, which I'm delighted to be speaking amidst such distinguished company today. Now, to answer your question, I do have to, and in response also to Mariette's discussion, I do have to go into the concept of digital sovereignty a bit, because as you said, it is the hot topic as of late in our Brussels bubble as Europe's strategy for the transition into the digital age, which of course COVID has now, let's say, pressed the fast forward button on. This is in fact, after all, what, Europe's digital decade. And I don't need to repeat what both President VDL and Commissioner Breton have said in respect of us taking our destiny into our own hands and having mastery and ownership of these key technologies, some of which you just referred to. I must say that every time I discuss digital sovereignty, I find myself also struggling with its precise definition. And I understand the undertones that Mariette was referring to before. And I think I think it is actually important to have a clear definition, understanding of what we mean by digital sovereignty. It's clear that no matter how it's defined, it's definitely crucial because it ultimately, what it is, it's about who gets to shape our future, who gets to decide what this digital age will look like. And Europe has a big stake in this. So for the Commission, it might be about setting standards. For the Council, we have this. It's a requirement of, let's say, strategic autonomy. For us in Parliament, we've talked about our ability to act independently in the digital realm. For me, digital sovereignty is part of a more geopolitical Europe. And ultimately, it's about two things. It's about power and it's about rules. Power and rules combined are what create, for me, this three-pronged, let's say, definition of digital sovereignty. Digital sovereignty is about the power to, one, to make our own rules, two, the power to rule over, let's say, the rest of the world by extending our rules, and three, to rule out violations of these human fundamental and civil rights of our citizens and our democracy in and of itself. So the power to make our own rules, I think, is best expressed by the term strategic autonomy. Now, I like this term maybe better because it's actually a Greek word. It comes from aftos, which means self, and nomos, which means law. So literally, it's our ability to make our own laws, our own rules. So I think this is a good definition of the first aspect of digital sovereignty, namely our ability to act, to decide autonomously on what the essential digital aspects of our future are with respect to our economy, to society, and democracy. And I don't mean to get too theoretical because, after all, I'm an economist and a lawyer, so I like being practical. But I think that the EU seeks to extend its influence and autonomy, or our power to make our own rules, to others, and to persuade them to set similar, if not identical, standards. This is the second aspect. It's what Mariette commented on as the Brussels effect. I don't want to overestimate this. I've had very long conversations with the author on New Bradford on what happens. GDPR, yes, is the quintessential example of this in the past, but what happens in the digital world? Can we, for example, with this AI Act introduced now, produce our AI gold standard for the world? That's a big question. And the final aspect, which I think is also the most crucial of them all, is the one that provides, let's say, democratic justification for pursuing digital sovereignty with all its undertones as a policy goal, is ruling out the potentially hazardous consequences of this, call it the fourth industrial revolution. It's only reasonable, for me at least, to prioritize the protection of citizens from all the negative impacts of the EU having to follow standards which are not consistent with our fundamental values and rights, subjecting us to practices like mass AI surveillance and social scoring, which now with this new regulation have been deemed forbidden. So the focus here, I think, is on the effects of digital transformation on society, on the economy, on modern governance, and basically on the life of our citizens. This is about digital self-determination. And this power struggle involves state actors and non-state actors, and the achievement of the end result is definitely a big challenge. So you asked me, I come to your question, you asked me, Laura, how is artificial intelligence related to digital sovereignty? Well, artificial intelligence, aside from the flavor of the digital decade, put succinctly, I think, it has the potential to change the world, from improving medical diagnosis to predicting natural disasters, autonomous weapons, market manipulation. And as a result of both its versatility and its impact, it's predicted to generate trillions for the global economy, creating new jobs, rendering other jobs obsolete. If Europe successfully overcomes these challenges that were mentioned and finds a coherent strategy and fully scales up on AI innovation, it's supposed to add 2.7 trillion euros to our output by 2030. AI is also at the core of big tech. So the way we regulate AI is going to have a very big impact, as we all know from the lobbying that takes place, on the way big tech companies function and how they make their money. So AI is going to affect the everyday life of all citizens in just about everything. I'm not going to go into detail on this. I'll just say that AI is relevant in all of the three aspects of digital sovereignty that I mentioned before, and to all the actors that are involved because of its huge potential to create value and social impact. That's why, Laura, it's a sovereignty issue for the EU. Artificial intelligence is a tool to help us achieve the EU's goal of digital sovereignty. In fact, if you look at it through the prism of geopolitics, it's actually like a digital nuclear power in the race to reign supreme in the digital age. So I come to the last part of your question, which is, and to be more pragmatic, what's the level of maturity in relation to AI in Europe? Where are we in relation to China and the US on this issue? A number of states across the world are increasing their investments rapidly to establish themselves as leaders in AI development. The US and China have explicitly listed this as one of their top goals. Europe is currently lagging behind China and the US when it comes to the AI global race. China and the US are leading in R&D. They host the largest share of high-value AI startups by far. Chinese companies are ahead of their European counterparts, both in terms of AI adoption and their ability to get financial impact from AI, which is also important. China's investing billions, I don't need to tell you this, in AI, 5G, quantum computing, chip fabrication. All of this is part of its overall strategy, and it has 1.4 billion people to produce data and generously supports its own techno giants with state aid. Europe, I think, is currently demonstrating its ambition to take the lead in setting digital and tech standards worldwide, and is placing, as Mariette says in many of her articles, the democratic values at the heart of our tech rulebook. Ergo, the recently published Artificial Intelligence Act, which I'm convinced is a turning point in all of our discussions about AI, in Europe certainly, and possibly worldwide. This is a major move for Europe, and that we still have a long way to go. History has just recorded that Europe is taking the lead in proposing the legal rules of the AI game, and this should inspire, I hope, like-minded partners. So aside from the internal challenges of putting together a functional approach to AI, which at the same time fosters innovation, looking for this balance where we protect our values and our rights, and beyond this regulatory activism, the EU is lagging behind in AI development and in investment, a factor which calls into question our legitimacy, I think, and will do so more in the future as a global leader. So we need large investments. We need highly skilled digital professionals. We need secure, performant, and sustainable digital infrastructures. as much money as has been invested in the Digital Europe program, and there's plenty, and the fact that there's a 20% digital expenditure target for the Recovery and Resilience Facility, still, Laura, we need more. You're right to underline that size is difference between the investment planned by Europe, the US, and China. And I won't go into the numbers, but I'll say in closing that we need more cooperation amongst the member states to achieve critical mass at a global level, and of course with like-minded partners like the United States to send a clear message to China and to other authoritarian surveillance states around the globe. The US and the EU, the US is the EU's closest ally and its most powerful. The transatlantic relationship when it comes to AI, from my perspective, is absolutely essential. So a new rule book proposed by the EU could be an excellent textual starting point for transatlantic discussions. And I'm pleased that it was greeted by Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, as a good start, as a common framework that reflects exactly what we share: values and a commitment to protecting the rights and dignity of all our citizens.
Okay, thank you. Anne-Marie Engoff-Larsen, you're based in the United States, so you have a good vision of the US ecosystem versus the Europe's ecosystem. So what is your assessment of Europe's level of digital innovation compared to the US and to China?
Thank you so much, Laura, and good morning here from Silicon Valley, and thank you for the invitation to Renaissance Numérique for speaking here today. It's a great pleasure to be in this distinguished panel. I think maybe before I go into your question on kind of the perspective here from Silicon Valley, just a few words on my role, very much to what Marietje Schaake was talking about before, the need for a tech envoy. This is very much the role I have, but for the country of Denmark. So representing Danish interests and values to the global tech industry. And with a very kind of strong mandate to work to defend democratic values, with working with like-minded partners in this endeavor. It's about putting democratically elected governments and the citizens that they represent back in the driver's seats of where our technological development is headed. And finally, it is to promote a responsible and a secure technological development, both with companies, but also the uptake with consumers. So very much a global mandate working with these issues. I think looking from over here, moving towards a digitally sovereign Europe can help partly, but I'm very happy to see the European leadership on the regulatory side. But I think one thing recognizing here from Silicon Valley is that you can't win the game by simply being a referee. This requires that Europe becomes self-determined. It requires to be open, and I think requires to really start building on the foundations that have led this place that I'm in right now to be a technological superpower. Being able to develop and be in the driver's seat of artificial intelligence, cloud computing, supercomputing, biotechnologies, neurotechnologies, really be the one not just that are defining and regulating how these should be used, but much more the use of them and the development of them commercially. I also just want to say that when we talk about digital sovereignty from a Danish perspective, this is very much not about shielding ourselves. On the contrary, we see in the past couple of decades how digital technologies have become critical for our societies, for work, education, entertainment, communication, shopping, health services, down to the very question of what does it mean to be a human being. And not to remind anyone, but the last 12 months has equally shown us what are the massive impact of technologies on the ways that we live. And in that, I think recognizing how much those technologies are affecting every day of our lives, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, if they are not developed, designed with European values in mind, based on what we think are democratically secure, a safe way, an ethical way to use technology, it will be defined by someone else. For most of the time, the technologies that we use in Europe, they are developed by over here where I'm sitting right now, by people who are living thousands of miles away, who might have, a different understanding of the world, a different systemic view on how technology should be created. So this is really, I think, an opportunity And it's a call for action for European developers to be much more focused on how to actually build the technologies of the future. And looking at where we are in that, I mean, as the previous speaker was also talking to, and as the Commission's recent communication on the digital decade, shows we have a very, very slow growth when it comes to European ICT specialists. Living here in Silicon Valley, there is an absolute abundance of amazing, talented people who are here to develop. In Europe, we have too few. And we will be far below the projected 20 million experts we will need by 2030 with the current rate of development. Key areas here is cybersecurity, data analysis, and I think much more people who are willing to not just create startups, but create scale-ups. Going from a startup, and then often what we see is that Europe is good at creating startups, but then they move abroad or they get sold and acquired. We need to also see scale-ups on European ground. Secondly, I think the Commission's highlighting the EU gap on high-end computer chips, especially in the state-of-the-art fabrication technologies and chip design is very important, not least for talking about digital sovereignty and open strategic autonomy in this sense. And then finally, also just touching, I think, on the cloud data, what we see now is that cloud data produced in the European Union, it's often stored, processed, and the value is extracted outside of Europe. If the data economy is where so much of current value is created, and where businesses have a huge opportunity for generating new value, but also seeing new markets, we need to think about how does that align more with actually also delivering that value in the European Union. From a Danish perspective, so not just a Silicon Valley perspective, but from a Danish perspective, we very much support the ambition of the digital decade. There is a joint letter created to President von der Leyen with Germany, Finland, Estonia, and Denmark that very clearly lays out that we support a digital sovereign Europe, which is self-determined, but that remains open. And I think this is one of the key points sitting from over here is if Europe is to, I think, keep its promises on what is the possibilities, all the opportunities, the magnificent wonders that we're seeing from emerging technologies, it requires an open and interoperability. It requires an ability to work with the technologies that are coming from outside of the European Union while building strength, building capacity, building talent in Europe to use it, build upon it, and also build, I think, competitive products. And that needs to be at the key focus on how we're developing our digital capabilities in Europe. And finally, I think one last thing for me to say is looking at the conversations about a stronger digital Europe here from Silicon Valley. It is by, they also read a lot of newspapers, conversations about Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, Data Governance Act, all of these are obviously on the agenda here. But this stronger coordinated Europe might not necessarily be. I think there's an opportunity for Europe to develop a digital foreign policy ambition that supports a coordinated approach to digital standard setting in international bodies. That is taking all the amazing and I think quite innovative, quite bold, drastic measures that are happening within the European single market and projects that out into a more global role. A policy ambition on digital that allows Europe not just to stand strong ground internally, but also externally. That could look at supporting developing and emerging economies in the digital transformation. It's about holding tech giants accountable for behavior in third countries and not just looking at what happens within the European borders. And then finally, it's about responding more strongly to digital foreign interference and cyber attacks. It's about shaping global governance with European norms, democratic values. It's about listening to the European founded tech companies that are European in their core, but globally oriented. And it's about putting Europe much more globally in the driver's seat of responsible technology development. So I think from Silicon Valley, in summary, there is by all means, I think, a recognition that Europe is doing a lot more, that Europe is focusing on becoming much stronger in this area. But as I say at the beginning, the referee do not win the game. It is also about building those digital capabilities. And I think about a much stronger Europe, not just in the European single market, but also on a global scale. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot. And now we're moving to cyber with Guillaume Poupard. So the main question is simple. What are the main challenges for European sovereignty in the field of cybersecurity?
Okay, hello everybody. I hope you can hear me. Let me start with a piece of French history. In 2008, we started thinking about cybersecurity and what we should do at the nation level in order to be sure that our digital security would be good enough. And 2008 was just 1 year after Estonian attacks against Estonia. And maybe for the youngest, they don't remind, but at this time, some Russian patriots, as Vladimir Putin said this time, decided to disturb all the country, all the nation, thanks to cyber attacks. So 1 year later, we considered that such a threat was not acceptable and that we should make cyber a real priority for France. And if I say it, it's just because whatever you take as a definition for digital sovereignty, you observe that cybersecurity is necessary for this sovereignty. And now, many years after, we still consider that if we want to be sovereign, whatever the definition may be, we need to be able to a good cybersecurity level and be able to protect our information systems. So it was a long time ago, and when we applied our strategy from this time, we soon observed that there were many things to do at the national level, but the good level probably for many ideas was the European one. Of course, it's more complex, but it is absolutely necessary to deal with some topics at this European level. And that's what we did in the past. Well, and I say we, it's not our identity, it's all the people who work in Europe to build this security, this sovereignty. We did many things. And I want to say it not only to be proud of what we did, but to say that everything is not negative in the domain of European sovereignty, digital sovereignty. We did many things and we can be proud of it. The first thing we did was the NIS directive, the so-called NIS directive, in charge of the security of critical operators in Europe. The idea was to preserve national sovereignty, because of course some of those critical operators are directly linked with the national security, but also to develop some harmonized rules at the European level. And it was a very important time because what Europe said was that cybersecurity should be developed in all the member states and at the European level. The option of trying to find some protection in Europe or outside Europe was not a good option. All the member states should develop their own capabilities in cyber. And then we used it to identify the critical operators, the critical systems, and to develop a first level of European cybersecurity. This was an important first step. Then we worked a lot on certification. You can consider that certification is something very technical, but in practice it is absolutely necessary in order to build trust and to transfer trust from producers to consumers. And thanks to the Cyber Act, we now have a framework when we can develop our schemes, European schemes, and what was done at the national level before will soon be done at the European level. It was the second step and a good win, I think, for Europe's sovereignty. And then we keep on building some networks. We consider that cyber cannot be harmonized, but should work with networks, with actors in the different member states. We built many networks, some technical ones, for example, with the CSERT network, which is very personal. When there are cyber attacks against Europe or against member states, we are able, thanks to this network, to share many information and very quickly, and some sensitive information, which is necessary. We also have a NIS group network, who of course focused on the NIS directive, but was also able to deal with very complex questions like 5G security. And of course, everything can be done at the European level, but thanks to the 5G toolbox, it was possible to publish, to share a common security analysis related to 5G, as much technical as possible, and also to share the good ideas we can have in the different member states to be sure that we master the security of those new 5G networks and that we will be able to do it in the future. So it was also a success. And finally, what was started during the past years was to build a real cybersecurity industry in Europe. We often consider that we don't have enough industry able to do things in Europe, but it's wrong in many domains. And we have seen, thanks to the cyber public-private partnership between the Commission and the EXO organization, that there are many good industries in Europe able to build our cybersecurity, but also able to talk with non-European industry. So it is good for me. It is a good example of what we can do. We can talk about sovereignty, about security, but at the same time, we can talk with people who are not European. And it is, of course, absolutely necessary in the domain of digital. So if we now look in the future, what will happen, what we should do during the next years, well, this story repeats a bit, but we need all the time to correct things and to be more ambitious. So we are already working on the new NIS directive. I hope it will be ended during the French presidency next year. And the idea of this new directive is to take the good idea of the first version, but also to be more ambitious, to enlarge the number of critical operators, and also to deal with some operators who work directly in the digital field. And well, if we consider, for example, managed services providers, of course, they are very important for digital development. They are important for the cybersecurity, and they are not regulated today. So it's just an example of the kind of enlargement of a directive we would like to put in place. So we will work on this NIS directive. We are already doing this. It will help Europe to be more secure, more sovereign in our domain, and it will be very positive. The second point, and my last point, is about certification. And if I focus on the most complex topic of certification, which is certification of cloud services, well, we consider that we need trusted cloud in Europe. It's obvious. We consider that this trusted cloud cannot be done without the best offers from a technological point of view. So the question is, how can we work with technology providers which are not European? Most of them are US today, but tomorrow they will come from China. How can we work with them, and how can we trust the result and the services they provide? So using the certification scheme we are building, thanks to ENISA and many experts, thanks to the Cyber Act, who put in place the certification framework. Now the question is, can we develop a certification scheme that says that at the highest level, the solutions are secure from a technological point of view, from an operational point of view, but also from a legal point of view. And today we need to be very strong to decide that we want that the highest level of certification, only European laws apply. And we can try to get the technology coming from outside Europe, but we must not get at the same time non-European regulation, like Cloud Act, to be very clear. So this is today the situation where we are. We announced this morning at the Ministry of Economy in France that we put in place a new label for secure cloud, for trusted cloud. But our ambition is not to do it in France, but really to do it in Europe. And I hope that thanks to the Cyber Act, we'll soon have a certification scheme where for the highest level of trust and confidence, we can say this is European cloud, even if it doesn't only use European technology. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you for this, and thank you for mentioning the French cloud strategy. We will go back to that during the questions. So now, René Sommer from Ericsson, on the infrastructure and telecom point of view, what is the digital dependent situation?
Thank you very much for having us with you today. I would like to maybe start with the perspective of not a referee, but a player in the market, and would very much like to start with the perspective that we can definitely build from strength to strength. And if we start with the infrastructure part, of course, most of us agree here that 5G really moves the frontier of digital transformation for both industries and for the public sector. And it has the potential to unlock a new wealth of innovation and also to concretely and substantially also contribute to decarbonization of Europe's economy. And this innovation platform is really to be considered as a critical digital infrastructure for the innovation and for the economic activities going forward. To that end, we need to make sure in Europe that we get high-performing nationwide 5G networks as soon as possible to create this innovation platform. This is something which is about building a strategic choice, building into a strategic capability. Just building 5G for coverage, for fast broadband is not enough. And here what we are really calling out for is to make sure that Europe needs mid-band deployments to achieve this full 5G innovation platform nationwide. This is what the leading digital nations are doing today, and this is where Europe needs to act urgently. This is also important if we move into the data discussion to lead in the future edge cloud technologies, where a 5G network will be a prerequisite to build a network that is really a compute network that uses widely distributed cloud edge capabilities. Without a full 5G high-performing network, this is not possible. Now, looking at the capabilities here, of course, Europe is hosting two European world-leading high-tech innovation companies in 5G. And all 5G pioneering countries, including those that are ahead of Europe in terms of 5G rollout, use and deploy European 5G technology. So this is very much the case that Europe is offering globally cutting-edge 5G technology to the rest of the world. This is a key strength for Europe and maybe one of the unique strengths that Europe has. And this is the foundation for our strengths. And just to give you some examples in terms of that leadership, both the Gartner Magic Quadrant and also the Frost assessment this year put Ericsson on top of all technology suppliers in the 5G infrastructure market as the leading one. But having, of course, cutting edge technologies is also important to have strength in supply chains. And this is maybe my second point coming to the discussion, and not only looking at the presence of cutting edge technologies like we have from Europe in 5G, but also to have a supply chain that is robust and strong for supplying both Europe but also the global world. Ericsson has chosen a global distributed supply chain. So we do have, of course, presence in terms of R&D and manufacturing in countries like Brazil, like India, like North America, etc. But we also are significantly present in Europe. Not to least say 60% of our global R&D staff is located in European Union. We have 2 manufacturing sites in Europe, in 2 different European countries, and we also have in another European country 1 global out of 4 service centers, and a numerous number of R&D sites across European Union, from Spain to Finland, and many more. And let me just give you 2 examples, given where we are today. So in France, we have been present since 1909, and recently announced also our expansion of a new R&D center that will by 2023 employ more than 300 people. And we're also, of course, not only supplying technology of this critical infrastructure to French operators, but also collaborate with important and strategic industries like Airbus or with Thales and EDF to deploy private communication network for nuclear plants. Looking just immediately to France, also just an example from Germany, one of our leading, globally leading ICT development centers is located in Aachen. And in 2019, Fraunhofer IP selected Ericsson to supply the private 5G network, which is today Europe's largest industrial 5G research network. So this is the foundation, the strength that I was starting off my intervention. But of course, looking into the future, building from strength to next strength, and talk about the next G that is going to be an important developments going forward. So we see already now a number of countries investing early in 6G research. And of course, our view is that Europe needs to be at the forefront here. And investing in this future technology is essential to maintain Europe's strength and future leadership. So the point being here that we very much, of course, urge European policymakers to make sure that Europe's 6G research is centered on Europe's strength in mobile communication and in 5G in particular. This is the basis for expanding and growing our future capabilities, innovation, and technology contribution that we can share with the rest of the world. In that context, of course, when we talk also about the multilateral regime and international order, the foundational standardization for 5G and future 6G, we maintain that 3GPP should be the standard that is going to be used for also implementing future technologies like 6G, where 3GPP is also WTO and TBT compliant, that satisfies, for example, the WTO rules in terms of openness, transparency, consensus, and industry-led innovation. And lastly, also what I would like to ask in advance to policymakers across Europe, that Europe, of course, needs to engage in international 6G research cooperation with countries like United States, like Canada, Japan, for example, UK and Australia. So this is the next phase that we see that we need to build from strength to next strength. And to round this off, where we look at European technological capabilities in the digital domain, we see, of course, a strong and globally leading capabilities in areas such as antenna and filter technology, which are the baseline technologies that are necessary to foster advanced communication systems, analog semiconductor technologies, in optical technologies, signal processing, large-scale software development, significant software development that already takes place in 5G, of course, will be required also in 6G. And specifically, we talk about software that is related to mission-critical systems and to infrastructure-related software. And to conclude also in terms of where we see that Europe needs to strengthen its technical capacity, where there are strengths or weaknesses, today, of course, coming back to the point around digital semiconductor manufacturing, but also very much in the design of these technologies is a very important capacity and capability that should not be forgotten. We also have challenges when it comes to data center processing technologies such as FPGAs, graphic processors, and switching and routing processing capacities, and of course AI, and to an extent also end devices for IoT technologies. So maybe I can stop here and see if there are any comments or questions as we continue.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for those introductory remarks. I want to remind the audience that you can ask questions via the online tool. Maybe one first question for you, Anne-Marie Engoft Larsen, because you mentioned during your speech talent and the difference between talent in the US and Europe. We have a question from the audience on exactly this, which notes that other countries such as Russia, China, India, they strategically invest in digital and tech education. So there are two questions. Why are we Europeans lagging behind? And where are our free coding camps?
I think that's a great question. Free coding camps alone probably won't do it. I think there are really two things that need to be focused on. One is around education. For too long, we looked at STEM education. We've been having way too few girls and women in STEM and also in these professions, and we're missing half of the population in Europe to actively participate in tech development. So looking broadly at all STEM, I think all kind of science, technology, educational backgrounds, this is both about investing into them, but it's also about making them more attractive, more easy to get into with the right intention, I think the right mindset for young students to enter into. Secondly, there is a question around boldness, ambition, this sense to become the new Ericsson. So where do we find those, the young, talented, amazing programmers, people with a good startup idea, people who are developing technology, building stronger ecosystems for them? Because so much of building new technology, building a business is also about having the right ecosystem, access to talent, access to capital, but also access to what is hard to really put, I think, on a formula, but that's here in Silicon Valley. Even amongst the pandemic, it feels like it is here. It's this believe that you can do and you should build bigger things. It's the pursuing of ambitions that might seem far-fetched. So I think building on this stronger European ecosystem, and whether that's in Copenhagen and Brussels and Paris and Berlin, but finding ways to connect it. And yes, the language is not the same across the countries, but find that as a strength. Use it as an opportunity that the diversity of Europe is built into this diverse, I think, more strong, more exciting, and frankly, also a better eco-innovation system is really what is needed for talent. And then just a final point on these coding camps that we talk so much about. This is not a generational conflict. This is not only about that programmers and talent has to be young boys and girls and men and women. This really has to be lifelong. So looking at whether it is those people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who are sitting at the helm of the SMEs around Europe, how to build technical capabilities, understanding, a technological intuition that is not necessarily making us all programmers, but with enough understanding and appreciation of technology to be able to integrate them into our companies, to our operations, to the way that we're working. So better, more investment in education, 2, stronger ecosystems, and 3, really thinking about this life learning.
Follow-up questions. Is it more that we do have the good universities but people are not attracted to them, or is it that our universities are not good enough, if I can put it a bit bluntly?
I mean, I have the pleasure of living close to Stanford, and there is no doubt that this is really a miracle for turning out incredible talent. Looking broadly at universities across Europe, we have magnificent universities, but I think competing for not just being great, but being excellent, being centers of the best, being where we have the best developers, the best AI talent, combining, I think what's been so strong in Europe is that our best universities, they're interdisciplinary. You do not only study business, but you study business and ethics, philosophy, society, anthropology, understanding these nuances and where we weave in European democratic values. to what Anna Michelle talked to, going all the way back to ancient Greece and some of the fundamentals that we've been building our society on. But if we are to turn out the best and the brightest of these universities and build them as centers of excellence for also creating new technology, creating cutting edge companies that will become massive unicorns in Europe, I think making sure they're not only great, but they become excellent. And that also requires that some universities really go that extra mile. They get that extra funding, is where we should start to look at.
Okay, and talent and is also something that is important for artificial intelligence, which leads me back to you, Anna Michelle Asikamopoulou. You mentioned the gap, the investment gap between Europe, the US, and China, and Europe with its recovery plan is trying to, with the 20% that would be invested in digital technologies, is trying to fill that gap. Do you think we're making enough efforts, or what?
Myself. Well, do I think we're making efforts? I think we are making efforts, Laura, but I think we're gonna need to make more. Let's put it that way. I mean, especially let me just touch on what we heard about 6G, for example. I know that this, when we talk to policymakers, this might feel like it's far away for most of us, but the battle, let's say, over 6G standards has already begun. And 6G is expected to support this unprecedented Internet of Everything. There's extremely diverse and challenging requirements like data security, user privacy, energy sustainability. So I think even though academia and industry are already focusing on research on 6G networks, despite the fact that 5G is under deployment, I think that it's a very attractive area for private investment as well. I'll just mention that just a month ago, the US and Japan paved the way for cooperation between the two countries on the beyond 5G technology. And the list of joint commitments include $2.5 billion from the US and $2 billion from Japan for 6G. So on our side, we're making moves to get hold of 6G technology, but I think that we need to do more. In February, the Commission adopted a legislative proposal for the next period, setting up $900 million to coordinate research and innovation activities on 6G under Horizon Europe. And the Commission hopes to leverage, I think, a similar amount from the private sector. So that's $1.8 billion in total investment. But if we want 6G to be secure, if we want it to be open, efficient, we have to take action. We have to make sure that this is also based on European values and the best technology standards available. One of the lessons we learned from the pandemic is that in times of rapid change and growing complexity and uncertainty, times we live in, responsible governance on our part requires that we be prepared for the unexpected in order to build greater anticipatory capacity. So I think we need to be much more forward-looking and take a long-term approach into our digital and tech policy making. And clearly, this is not going to come cheap. So a lot of the times it is about leveraging on financial resources. And this is something that the EU has to pay particular attention to.
Okay. And since we're on 6G, I'm going back to Renee Sommer. So what would you say are the must-haves for Europe not to miss the 6G revolution?
Well, I think firstly, it is about being out there early with a clear signal and ambition, both politically and also in terms of public support for R&D that is centered on Europe's strength in 5G. This is one of the few unique ICT capabilities that Europe has to offer to the rest of the world. So we need to use that strength to build from to expand into the future. And of course, in this context, we should also collaborate with other countries, like mentioned here, Japan, United States. And in those discussions, we need to center that debate on our strengths. This needs to be the starting point of the discussion. And when we move to research activities and then subsequent standardization, the essential role of international standards, global standards, and in this context, 3GPP and ETSI in Europe, this is an absolute prerequisite. We need to safeguard this WTO TBT compliant standard, and Europe's contribution here has been always in the forefront, and we need to make sure that we are still there also when it comes to 6G.
Okay. And now to move to a more immediate topic, Guillaume Poupard, you mentioned France's cloud strategy, which was presented this morning. So I have two questions. You said that this label, Trusted Cloud, that the ambition was to do it at EU level. So how does France plan to push it at European level? And the second question is that this morning, French Secretary of State for Digital, Cédric O, he referred to the partnership between OVH and Google, the cloud partnership, as an example of what could look like a secure solution that is still half American, basically. So do you look at those partnerships too as the cornerstone of secure cloud?
Well, maybe I'll start with the second question. The idea we have is we need trusted cloud, meaning that the security must be at the highest level from a technical point of view, from an operational point of view. And in practice, the list of rules we make mandatory for this level is public. It's in French, but it's public. And we already have a kind of certification scheme in France called Secnum Cloud, whose aim is to build trust with cloud. Today, what we add is a kind of legal security, and what we do is to test if non-European regulation like Cloud Act, Patriot Act, and many other ones apply or not. We consider that we can work with US technology providers, but also with others coming from all over the world. But we don't want their legal framework come. All the technical assessment need to do is to check if
we have a little bit of a connection problem. Can we? Okay. So before we get, it's a shame because Guillaume Poupard was saying very interesting things. Can we hear you now?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay, well, I'm told that it's better now, so you can continue what you were saying.
Okay, sorry. So I was just saying that we consider that we can work with non-European technology providers, but what we don't want is non-European legal framework. And you mentioned the example of the French company OVH working with Google. Well, it can be such an example. We have to test, to check if the legal security is good enough, but it is exactly an example of what we want to do. And we consider that we can work with most of the big US technology providers, but we want a kind of European application of our technology operated by European actors, industry, just to be sure that non-European laws doesn't apply. So that's the goal in France, but well, we must be able to do it at the European level. France is small to be, and what urban level.
It's fine. I think we can hear you again. Can you try?
We are going to use, we are already using the Cyber Act, which developed a framework, a certification framework, to be able to certify some products and services and so on. And today we are working with our different counterparts and with ENISA, the Cybersecurity Agency, European Cybersecurity Agency, to develop a scheme to certify some cloud services. And at the different levels and at the highest level, we want to be sure that the solution will be secure from a technological point of view, but also.
We lost Guillaume Poupard again. Okay, so maybe one last topic for questions before we move to the conclusive remarks. We talked a lot about investment and money. So maybe one question for you, Anne-Marie and Goff Larsen, since you're in the Silicon Valley with all the venture capitalists. How does Europe's startup financing system fare compared to the US?
I think 5 years ago, we would have said it fared not very well. I think a lot has been done. Commission. I think a lot has been done from venture capitalists, private venture capitalists, and I think we're starting to see much more available in risk-willing capital in Europe. However, it is far, far from at the same level. We're seeing investments here that are significantly higher than they are in Europe. So as I was speaking to before, the eco-innovation system requires both public and private actors. And I think the Commission and I think the European Union and a lot of the member states in all of the different pieces of legislation, digital decade, all of these things have really gone, I think they set the ambition. Whether we're talking a digital sovereign Europe, whether we're talking digital decade, this is the overall ambition for where Europe is headed. And it is my sincere hope that this becomes a call to action for a lot of the private actors to take up the baton and say, so what is our role in this? Whether it is as venture capitalists, investors, building accelerators, helping talent create successful startups, merging and using foreign technology, but building European capabilities with it. So there's no doubt that we're seeing, I think we're on a positive upward trajectory if we were to look at this as a graph. But if we are to continue that, and I think if we are to meet the quite ambitious text, and let's be honest, it's still mainly text, whether it's legislation, intentions, political speeches, it has not materialized completely into reality. And that requires public-private collaboration. It requires us to watch and learn, and I think copy some of the things that we're seeing over here in terms of that risk-willing capital, and then combining it with saying, if we believe, I think in the kind of geopolitical realm, we talk about the European approach to tech development be much more funded in different values, focusing much more on privacy, security, integrity for the individual. How about we tie, I think, some of those expectations and values to also the investor community, making sure that investments in Europe into tech is actually fostering more sustainable, more secure, more democratic technologies that are not just great, but excellent, and that can compete, I think, on a global market and show that you can take a different approach to technology development that is at the same time competitive, that delivers great products both to businesses and to customers.
Okay. And one last question for you, Anna Michelle Asimakopoulou, before we move to the conclusions. There's a question that kind of is telling us that we're taking this from the wrong perspective. Shouldn't we first start by establishing serious national ministries of digital affairs and invest in the digital transformation of our public institution? Isn't that step one?
I think that's part of the process, but I mean, I think we are doing that in Europe. I can tell you, I'm very proud of where my country is at the moment. I mean, in the midst of the pandemic, we have made, let's say, leaps and bounds in terms of our digital infrastructure. I guess for one because we have to. For second, because we actually have an excellent minister and a government that prioritizes this. But I will agree with the fact that yes, clearly, what's done at the national level is very, very important. I think that Marietta mentioned that. I think that Anne-Marie mentioned that, you know, this culture of investment can't only just be at the EU level, at the private level, it'll be also at the national level. And I think that the 20%, which has been, let's say, imposed as money that has to be invested from for digitization, a lot of it is going to go in many states to creating progress in the way the state interacts with citizens. So I think that I don't know if it's you know, step 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, we should be taking all these steps together in all these directions, but it certainly is a big part of the process.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We're now going to move to the conclusions. So each one of you can wrap up and tell us one key message that you want to convey or that you got from this conversation. So maybe René Sommer, we can start with you.
Yes, well, I would like to really stress that if we want to build from strength to strength, we need to make sure that we roll out full 5G, high-performing 5G network across Europe that creates the foundation for innovation in other sectors to provide the necessary capabilities for other industries to use this technology for the innovation and for the economic advancements.
And Guillaume Poupard, what is your one key message?
Yes, we developed cybersecurity in different member states, including thanks to the NIS directive. This was the first step. The second step was to develop networks. So all the capacities being able to work together at the technical level, operational level, strategic level. So now this is done. It must be used, of course, but it is done. So the next step now is to develop mutual assistance between member states in Europe. We want to work on this. We want to push all the stakeholders to work on this. And at the end, if we are able to do this mutual assistance, we can consider that we have built a real sovereign cybersecurity in Europe. So this is the next step. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Back to you, Anne-Marie Engoff-Larsen.
I think so much really important, very meaningful, and quite ambitious have been said today. I want to finish just where I think I also started, is that, you know, as a European, but sitting outside of Europe right now, seeing what's happening is incredibly heartwarming. It's ambitious. It's politically, I think, the right direction that we're taking. But if we are to look beyond Europe, we need to look at how to build a comprehensive, as I said before, digital foreign policy. Because as I believe, and as I said before, you know, standard setters, they can win the market. Market winners, they can influence the rest. And if we are to talk about a truly democratic, secure, safe, inclusive, sustainable technological revolution, it requires that a lot of the ways that we think and that we engage and that we develop and believe in technology in Europe shouldn't just be for Europeans, but should really be a global norm, and should be about setting the standards not just among our own borders, but much more globally, and help create that much stronger European voice. So if there's one thing I want to leave you all with, I think it's how to think about making Europe a safer and more prosperous place, not only by focusing on the internal single market, but by building a stronger European voice, both politically, on legislation and standards, but also for the amazing European companies that are truly, I think, defining what is a sustainable, inclusive, and much more secure technological future.
Okay. And Anna-Michelle Asimakopoulou, the last words are for you.
Well, I just want to say that I'm to congratulate you and thank you for this important opportunity to discuss digital sovereignty. I think that digital sovereignty and/or open strategic autonomy together are legitimate and very important strategies for Europe to become geopolitically more powerful. And I think as we pursue them with ambition, it's very, very important for us to cooperate with like-minded partners who share our set of values. This is an issue not just of power and control in the digital age, not just of prosperity, but I think that truly it is an issue of democracy when you look at it. And I think that the European Union would benefit greatly from having a tech ambassador that would be full-time involved in pursuing the achievement of these goals.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for following this, and stay tuned for the next panel.
Thank you very much, Laura, for moderating this first session. And a big thank you as well to the 4 speakers for sharing your views on this first topic with us. Thank you for your precious time. It's really appreciated. Many thanks to the audience as well for sending in some interesting questions. We have unfortunately lost the connection with Miss Marietje Schaak. I guess this is one of the hazards when you gather so many people from across the world, but we will ask if she can send in her talking points and share it with you. We will check about that. So now that we have identified a certain number of strengths and areas in which we can do better in Europe, the challenge will be to find solutions. But before we continue with our second debate, I suggest we have a short 15-minute break to relax our brains a bit. Of course, we would have loved to gather all of you in the same room for some coffee and tea, but I guess for now we have to do without. So let's resume at 4. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. The second debate of this conference will start in a few moments. Now that we have talked about the areas in which Europe is dependent in the digital field, let's try and identify solutions. That's probably the hardest part. So our second debate is called How can the EU develop sufficient capacities in the digital field in order to guarantee its sovereignty? This discussion will be moderated by Julien Nossetti. Julien is a senior associate fellow at IFRI, the French Institute of International Relations, and also a member of Renaissance Numérique. Once again, do not hesitate to send questions into the dedicated space under your screen, and our team of moderators will make sure they are passed on to Julien. Julien, thank you very much for moderating this discussion. You have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I'm very happy to open the second panel and trying to move beyond from the diagnosis. We'll try to sort of find a remedy to the European patient. So more seriously, I would say the second panel will seek to tackle the sufficient capacities the European Union could develop, could gather, could secure to guarantee what it has identified as its sovereignty in the digital field. Of course, we might well argue for hours, I would say, when it comes to agreeing on what it is about. Building sufficient capacities, and what does it mean in our particular field of interest today, the digital field. So is it about freeing itself from the twofold supervision of the US and China in the digital field, at least in some key technologies? So we have been talking in the previous panel about sometimes 5G, cybersecurity, semiconductors, and so on. So is it about that? Or is it about being able to choose our own interdependencies which may prove a way to emphasize the very nature of our globalization today. So, which is basically a digital-based globalization. So, well, the purpose of our second panel right now is to sample the do part of the coin. And as you all know, of the news related to the digital or tech field in the EU have been particularly intense over the past few months, and they're still remaining on the top of the news. So I insist here that we'll focus clearly on the EU capacities to act in this digital field we are analyzing today. And so we have been gathering for great speakers today, and we'll raise several key challenges and questions, just trying to list a few issues we will discuss this afternoon. So how will the EU manage to guarantee its access to the infrastructures it considers as strategic? And the EU, does it have to bathe its digital sovereignty, autonomy, interdependence on its regulatory power? It has sought to do so for the past few years. So shall it continue? Is it sufficient enough to assess its own independent path, I would say, in that field? And how it can foster more innovation and financing for its own, digital or tech ecosystem as a whole. I would also personally add another touch, which is directly tied to how I see also the issue. So how the EU countries can navigate in the troubled waters of tech geopolitics. So, China and the US have been mentioned at length in the first panel. So, how concretely the EU can, navigate purely in that world. So, to talk about such important topics, we'll hear four speakers, as I said previously. So, first of all, Mr. Thibaut Kleiner, who is Director of Policy, Strategy and Outreach of the European Commission's EU for the Directorate General for Communications, Networks, Content and Technology. We'll hear, secondly, Mr. Dragos Tudoras, who is a member of the European Parliament. And in the past, for the past years, you have been, in particular, Minister for Internal Affairs in your country, Romania. We'll then hear Mrs. Marie Eklund. You are the founder of 2050, and you will surely have the opportunity to express and develop what you are doing with this new actor. You're also a serial tech investor, I would say, and you gave birth to several success stories in the digital field as it is about today. And last but not least, we also hear Mrs. Karina Schulze, and you're Director of the European Union Government Affairs at ACP, so the one of our European tech giant, I would say. So I've spoken far too much, and I am giving first of all the floor to Mr. Thibaut Kleiner for approximately 10 minutes. 10 minutes of speech. So thank you very much, and we are listening to you.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me well. So Thibaut Kleiner, indeed, from the European Commission, and many thanks for organizing this panel today. And it's nice to see some of the fellow panelists I haven't seen for a while. I just wanted to share with you a little bit some of the policy areas that the Commission is putting forward to address this issue of digital sovereignty today. And clearly, I think that it's a very timely discussion. If you look at where we are now, doing this debate online, having actually a lot of interactions now online because of the COVID crisis, it is clear that there is an acceleration of the digital transformation. And at the same time, this is highlighting that somehow we have some dependencies in this sector. I mean, I would just refer to what happened in the past month with assembly lines having to stop in the automotive or white goods industry because there were not enough microchips delivered from Asia to Europe. I would just point at the fact that we are using softwares and platforms not developed in Europe to conduct these interactions online, and that there has been a growth of e-commerce these days, which is at levels higher than what we had every Christmas in the past, and unfortunately it's mostly on non-European e-commerce platform that this intensive growth has been experienced. I would also just flag the fact that people are consuming online a lot of entertainment, culture, again, not necessarily through European platforms. So clearly, the current situation is highlighting the opportunity of the digital transformation. And I think that as far as the EU is concerned, we have a very positive understanding of this digital transformation. We believe it can be something which brings prosperity, but also inclusion, as well as sustainability, because in fact, the green and the digital very often go hand in hand. So we have this positive vision for the digital transformation from Europe. We want to make sure that we have this vision from Europe. But at the same time, we have to find and recognize that there are some current dependencies as far as the digital transformation is concerned. And maybe as a first point, I would like actually to congratulate Renaissance Numérique for organizing these debates today, because in fact, the mere fact that we are openly discussing the topic of digital sovereignty has to be welcome, because it means essentially that Europe is able to see itself not only as a mere market, but actually also as an economic power that is able to define and to defend some common economic interests. And that's something which probably is growing at the moment. Unfortunately, Brexit has somehow weakened our global weight in the digital sector. But at the same time, probably the vision of a more integrated Europe is now really being much more realistic. And therefore, I think that this debate today is just another sign that we are moving in the direction of putting together our strength as European nations and countries. And in fact, it's not incidental that in the last year or so, there have been many debates between member states on the issue of sovereignty. Sometimes a little bit narrow debate, I should say, because very often this terminology of sovereignty has been seen as too loaded, too much associated with nationalism and sometimes even protectionism. And many member states were quite reluctant to use it. But I think that somehow positively in the past 2-3 months, I think that a consensus is emerging on the need to defend this notion of digital sovereignty, because actually it simply means that we are able to defend ourselves and to also put forward our interests in a way that is actually quite natural, just like China or Japan or the USA are defending their interests. I mean, Europe should do the same. We should not be ashamed of having this debate of trying to define our digital sovereignty, of trying to define how we can thrive through this transformation and make sure that actually we define the rules of the game in a way that suits us and that makes us stronger together, if I may say. So that's the first point, really. I think that debating sovereignty is as such a good way to start, because it means we try to work together to define this economic interest we have in the EU in terms of the digital transformation. Second point I would like to make is that it's not enough to just spell it out. You need to define it a bit more precisely. So what does it mean when we speak about digital sovereignty? Very often, as far as the Commission is concerned, this means trying to find out where we have strength and where we have weaknesses. So there is behind this a strategy, I would say, to try and determine where we need to do more, as Europe and when we need to intervene to redress maybe some problematic situations. And this means, for instance, that regulation sometimes is needed. And that's why the Commission has put forward proposals on the Digital Market Act or on the Digital Services Act that try to open up markets when they are gatekeepers that prevent the emergence of new players, for instance, or that undermine the vivid innovation potential of these markets. That's why as well Europe is putting forward some analyses as in the recent industrial strategy, where we try to analyze very precisely also from trade flows and strategic analysis where were the areas where we had dependencies in terms of imports, in terms of materials, so in terms of technologies. And they will be now set up following also the strategy on the defense in the EU, an observatory of critical technologies that will serve to continue identifying these areas. And similarly, we have a policy on controlling foreign direct investments to make sure that foreign companies cannot simply acquire our technology jewels without member states and the union being aware of it and possibly preventing this. I mean, we have seen recent examples where companies that were actually quite small, still around 30 million maybe, so easy to buy, had very innovative technologies and were at risk to being acquired by foreign players. Clearly a situation where Europe should act. So knowing where we have strength, knowing where we have dependencies is probably the first important step to define also our policy and priorities. And then, and as will be my third and last main point today, we need then to act in a very focused and efficient manner to address the areas where we are not as strong as we should. And this is very much the purpose of a recent strategy we put forward in place as the Digital Compass communication. So this communication tries not only to look at where we need to act, but actually put forward the direction of travel. We have a target now for 2030 with 11 objectives that cover 4 areas. We call them the 4 cardinal points of this digital compass. And that means skills. So where we want really not only that most, if not everybody, has basic digital skills to embrace the digital transformation, but also, and very important for our sovereignty, that we have digital experts. So people who are really experts in this technology. And we want 20 million such advanced experts in digital by 2030. So that's the first cardinal point. The second one is to say that we want also first-class infrastructure, because digital infrastructure is really the backbone of our sovereignty. And here we have ambitious objectives as regards 5G. We have good technology there, but we need to deploy it faster. Secondly, indeed, microprocessors, microelectronics. We want to have production facility also in Europe, not only the design of some microchips, but also production facilities to avoid dependencies. Third element, we want to make sure that we have also there, in terms of the data infrastructure, the data of the future in terms of cloud computing. So we want to have edge cloud nodes, which are closer to the users across the EU by 2030. 10,000 nodes, we believe, are needed to cover the whole of the continent. And finally, we want also on quantum computing to invest sufficiently to be first already to have a quantum computer. It's a race. It's a very important one. And from the EU as well as member states, we are putting funding on the table. So that's the second element in our compass, infrastructure. Third one, and also essential, we want to make sure that there is a transformation of business, that there is not only digitalization of all SMEs and companies, but also, and that's very important, that we do better at producing scale-ups and unicorns, this disrupting innovators that really can scale up and have a very large scale to advance not only their products, but also make sure that Europe as well as these leaders of tomorrow. And last point in our compass, the fourth cardinal point, is the transformation of government. We think that this as well is essential. We have seen in the recent period an acceleration as well of how digital services can be used by governments. And we want to make sure that, for instance, for e-health, there is a lot more accessible to citizens by 2030, as well as for digital identity. So to deliver on these targets, and I think it's very important that we set the vision, set the tone, we are putting together not only a program of funding through the EU budget, but also already today we are incentivizing member states to devote more than 20% of their national recovery plans to the digital sector, the digital transformation. So this means across the EU, more than 140 billion euros to be spent in the next 2-3 years. And altogether, really from various programs at EU level, we also have significant investments in terms of the, for instance, Digital Europe program, Horizon Europe, Connecting Europe facility, Invest EU, or the media program. So we have a series of tools that can support these investments. But first and foremost, we want to pursue a vision where member states join forces. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, this vision of Europe as an economic power requires that we don't think national, that we think European from day one. And that's why we are currently putting forward this challenge that member states embrace multi-country projects so that we deliver continental size infrastructures as far as 5G is concerned, but also as far as high performance computing and quantum is concerned, as far as also the support for innovation and digital hubs is concerned for SMEs. We believe that we can have a pan-European approach to these investments and therefore creating the scale that is so much required for the digital sector. So I will stop there, just really congratulating the initiative of talking about sovereignty, but also reassuring you that this is a very strong priority for the Commission and one where we want to devote not only regulation, but also strong investment support. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thibaut Kleiner. So your talk gave a lot of food for thought, and we are all reassured by the ambitions and recommendation given by the EU Commission, and we hope, of course, it become more concrete in the next future. So I'm right now moving to Mr. Dragos Tudorache. I think you have some words about the EU capacity to influence the narrative, the discourse abroad, because it's a fair point to say that we're able to develop our own capacities and so on, but we also have to project our own narrative and discourse abroad. Well, anyway, you have the floor, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you, and thanks for the invitation. I will try to be complementary to what Thibaut Kleiner said before, because he covered very well the instruments that we have right now available and some of the objectives that we have as EU in trying to achieve this sovereignty, which has taken quite a lot of meanings in the last 2 years in the different contexts in which it was raised. I chair a special committee on artificial intelligence in the European Parliament. I also sit in the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Security and Defense Committee. I also sit in the delegations with the US and the delegation with China of Parliament. Why do I say all of these things? Because that will give you an indication of the many instances in the European Parliament where the issue of digital sovereignty, the digital place for the Europe in the world is being discussed, and how interlinked all of these things are. And probably I will start from this premises for the discussion, which I think is very important, which is that sovereignty, this grand leitmotif for this political cycle, sovereignty or autonomy, or again, the different labels that it received, it is no longer, when it comes to digital, just something that is a consequence or an afterthought. In fact, digital, the digital transformation, frontier technologies, artificial intelligence, they have become, in fact, one of the core elements of how we, in fact, achieve sovereignty and how we need to conduct our business in the world, both with our partners, with the like-minded countries around the world, with which we see eye to eye in terms of values and principles and the way we understand democracy, but also how we address our business in the world with those that do not see values, democracy, human rights in the same way as we do. So again, like never before, digital sovereignty has become the bread and butter, has become, in fact, the one of the key elements in how we now perceive strategic autonomy in general, another very generous concept that we play with for the last 2 years at the European level, and how, again, we need to address our preparedness internally in the EU and our foreign relations, foreign affairs externally outside of the EU. I will say a few things on the internal part and also on the external part, because I think the two are connected. I won't delve too much on the internal points that I think we need to make if we want to achieve digital sovereignty. Again, my fellow panelists, Thibaut Kleiner has already mentioned a few, but I would say that resilience and competitiveness are key internal objectives if we want to, again, stand on our feet when it comes to the digital transformation and the way our societies and economies are preparing for that. What does it mean? A few points here that I think are important, based also on the many conversations that we've had here in European Parliament over the last months on digital, on artificial intelligence, on frontier tech in general. I won't rank them in terms of order. I will simply list them in terms of how often they actually come up in these conversations. I'll start with the protection of our citizens, of our consumers, of our European way of life, of the values and the understanding we have of rights and democracy. It is not by accident that this idea of a human-centric approach to artificial intelligence and in general to many of the regulatory instruments that we are producing now at European level when it comes to digital, again, it's not by accident that they put the human interest at the very core. Why? Because, again, here in Europe, we believe that we have to start from that. We have to start from the interests of individuals, of humans, and that rights and values and human interests need to be the ones that are driving the direction that we give to the development of these new technologies. So in the way we are designing and the way we're going to negotiate and finally adopt the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, the Artificial Intelligence Regulation, which has just been proposed a couple of weeks ago. So in all of these instruments, in fact, we are going to design the rule book of the digital lives that we're going to have tomorrow. And in doing so, we have to be aware that we are going to set some standards, to set some model. And in the second part, when we're going to discuss about the external aspects of it, we have to see how then this design and this internal model that we conceive for our own markets and for our own citizens can be something that we export successfully outside as a standard, as a model for our worldview of the digital tomorrow. The second element here internally is indeed setting the right objectives, and we already heard some of them in terms of maintaining and increasing our competitiveness in this digital world, and this starts from facilitating data flows and all the regulatory instruments that we're going to have for that. Again, the digital compass was also mentioned. It is essential that we have the right objectives, the right ambition, if, again, we are to secure this sovereignty that we are seeking. Then There were also issues mentioned related to the reliability of our supply chains. I'm not going to repeat those elements. I fully agree that this is an integral part of what we need to do to increase our resilience internally in the EU. Also, to secure the infrastructure of the future, not only in terms of how we secure the next 5G, but also something that I don't think we discuss enough strategically, which is the issue of undersea cables, undersea infrastructures, which can become a vulnerability from a security point of view, and which are very much supporting the digital infrastructure that we use here on the continent. Last but not least, we need to indeed invest, and I would say invest even more than what we have right now as an ambition in innovation, in startups, in research, in development, and in education. It's only by doing that that we can indeed stay competitive. I'll move on to the external aspects now, where I said already, this is the time when we are preparing the rule book for the digital tomorrow. And it's good that this rule book starts from instruments, legislative instruments that we are designing right now here in Europe, and that we are the first ones to do that. But while we assert this sort of normative sovereignty here in Europe, we need to also be aware of the need to stay and remain complementary with our allies. I think this is strategic perspective that we need to always keep when we discuss about sovereignty in this area, because we have to aim again to end up with a design of standards and norms that are governing the digital world, which are aligned with our like-minded partners. I'm not only speaking of the US, it is valid also for how we address Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, all of those, again, partners on the global stage, which are understanding democracies and values in the same way as we do. So as we work together with them to design this new rulebook, again, in trying to stay complementary with what they do, we can instill a new culture of digital diplomacy. So while we have reached out to the US as part of the new transatlantic dialogue, and we proposed the establishment of the TTC, of the Trade and Technological Council, they are proposing an alliance of democratic digital democracies. And so all of these, in fact, mean the same thing. They mean working together for this end, for the same end, again, of designing together the rules of tomorrow. And we have to do that with the interests of our citizens in mind, of our businesses in mind. But again, I repeat myself, with the understanding that we need to be complementary. And why is it important? Because we have on the other side another vision of the world. We have on the other side, we have China, we have Russia, that understand the need to design standards and to design technologies which maybe in economical terms may seem to be aligned with the, let's say, the broader global objectives of furthering technology. Again, from their point of view, the way they are deployed in societies and in relation to citizens and their interests, their understanding is different. And again, that is why we need to work together with our partners to have it clear that and to try in the multilateral fora to ensure that our understanding of how these rules should look like is one that is being then followed as a model later on by others. And last but not least, in these strategic objectives that we need to maintain, let's say in our external policies, to retain our claim for sovereignty internally for our digital purposes, digital objectives, we also need to design together with our partners the rules for deterrence and adequate response for hybrid and novel attacks enabled by technology. We have to understand that technology can be used for good, but can also be used for bad. And I think if we start from the impact of fake news and disinformation on many of our democratic processes, from elections to campaigning of whatever sort and nature, and going all the way to actually full-fledged attacks, hybrid attacks, using technology to affect our interests, economic or otherwise. This is a new reality. It's a new reality of warfare, which we need to incorporate into our strategic thinking and into the way we address digital sovereignty when we are discussing it at the world stage, again, either with our partners or with our competitors. So I will stop here. Thank you very much and look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dorach. I have a quantity of questions, which is extremely high after your talk. I hope we'll have the time, enough time later on to deal with some of the issues you specifically dealt with during the talk. So moving right now to Marie-Eklund. Well, I guess you're establishing a clear and I would say even an inevitable link between the digital and environmental transitions. I would be curious to hear you on this particular point and in relations to our topic today, and how to impulse and to assert our own path in Europe in these digital fields. Good. Thank you in advance.
Thank you. Yes, something that was just touched was the idea that technology can be used in different manner. And so the true question is actually what do we want it to be used for? And so at the European level, the question is what type of society do we want to build at the European level? What type of values do we want to defend? You were talking about democracy, you were talking about sovereignty. I think this is something that we need to keep in mind. I mean, digital sovereignty in itself has a greater goal than just digital transformation, because you're thinking about it being autonomous, being able to not depend from toxic dependencies or from other type of countries where you don't have complete autonomy on strategic fields. But it's not even that. It doesn't mean that we live in society where we all together believe it's good to live in. So I think it's just an intermediate goal. And what I see today, so I'm an investor, I've been investing in the tech field for 20 years now. And what I see now, which is very interesting, is that the same type of energy and of dynamics and of signals are seen today as what I have seen at the very early days of the tech revolution, but they're aimed to something different. What's happening is that we are seeing consumers, we are seeing talents, we are seeing individual investors all asking for another type of mutation, which is around sustainability, responsibility in business, environmental responsibility as well. So this new mutation, which is going hand by hand with digital, but which actually has a purpose, and people are having the same type of behaviors than what I have seen at digital, meaning that the usage is different, behaviors are different, consumers are asking for different types of products that are not here yet. They're asking for more transparency. Talents within companies are asking for more ethics. They're asking for diversity and inclusion. They're asking for greater transparency and governance. They're asking for fairness. And you also have shareholders who are also pushing pressure on companies for the exact same thing. And so this is also driven by the same type of people that were driving digital transformation, because they're forward-looking, that are young people, entrepreneurs, and researchers. And it has the same type of similarity in the sense that it's touching every business in every society, in every sector, all around the world. So it's by nature international, and it's really from individuals who are pushing institutions, who are pushing corporations to act. And this is pretty interesting as well, because you can see regulation is obsolete in the same way digital was in some areas, and that it will need to adapt. So it's providing the same type of disruption opportunities than what we had at the very early days of the digital transformation. But it's also adding something different, which is it's adding a purpose, this sustainability of the world or of our societies, this kind of ethics and responsibility. So it's adding a destination. And what is incredible is that Europe has always been has been a thought leader on all these topics for a while. So it is legitimate to take the lead on all these topics and on this transformation. So what I really see is that if we want to build that digital sovereignty, we need to think one step forward in saying, how can we build the digital industry practices, technologies of tomorrow? And these digital technologies, standards, practices, governance, they are actually those that will be sustainable, that will be responsible, that will be private. And we are known around the world, and we have proven that we can lead on these topics thanks to GDPR and how it was applied way broader than just Europe itself, but outside its frontiers. And so we can really take that step forward and think about, it's not about only sovereignty, it's about building the type of industries and economy that will take this mutation at first. And we can establish all these role models. And because we can think about the companies and finance these companies that will be able to be tomorrow's champions, because they will have understood that mutation at first, they will have taken the wave, and they will have adapted. So this is why we think when we invest now at 2050 about aligned companies, meaning companies that are aligning their business model and aligning their economical interests with those of society and those of the planet. And so, because we believe these companies who can do that at best will be tomorrow's champions. So this is, I think, really the trend we're in. So digital revolution is completely integrated now within this sustainable mutation. And as European countries and European companies, we have in our DNA the skills and the talents and the culture to lead that transformation, that mix of transformation. And I think this will be the way that we can reestablish sovereignty by building the role models of tomorrow. So one, through regulation, I was talking about GDPR and how it has impacted the rest of the world. So this can be an angle. We also need to demonstrate that because there's a lot to do. There are all the best practice you want about how you can transform digitally a company, agile methodology, how to be data-driven. There's all these best practices that are coming from 20 years of experimenting. We don't know yet what it takes to be able to take a company and build these new types of aligned role models. But we need to experiment and to build these best practices. And for that, there's a lot that can be done. Typically, investing in research like around green coding. Like when you see, I'm talking about concrete things. When you see Tesla, for example, it's a great example about how they understood that you can actually accelerate the transition of your own sector and use that to become a leader in your field. So Tesla did numbers of things. For example, what they did is that in 2013, they gave away all their patents because they said our competitors are not electric cars. Our competitors are, the old car industry. And what we want is to be able to build an ecosystem of electric cars providers and technology, and we want them to use our technology. And they became de facto the leader on this whole industry. Same thing, they're saying, we now can accept the Bitcoin payments. The reason they stopped is because of the environmental footprint of Bitcoin, saying it's not sustainable. So integrating at a European level a strategy about where we need to invest in research around green coding, infrastructure that are consuming less energy and that are having a less environmental footprint, has it to be in open resource and open data, because obviously AI is a very big thing, but we are coming into a place where there's a lot of things that we have never seen before. For example, if you look at agriculture, everything around climate change means that all the data we had previously, well, we're coming into unknown events. How can we build like common data sets that are helping us to accelerate in understanding all these changes and being able to act more quickly around integrating all these changes and making all these. So there's a lot of things around open data, open resource that we should be working on to be able to accelerate the transition and to build resilience on our infrastructures. There's a lot of things around knowledge. You were talking about how digital skills were important for the future. I believe that climate change knowledge, for example, is key for all companies to integrate what is going to happen and how they can build resiliency in their own business. Thinking about how you can, at your own level, be resilient because you're understanding how your ecosystem is, where all your dependencies and how you can act upon them at a company level is super important. And then we need role models. And so we do have some examples of companies who already have different type of governance, for example, and type of responsibilities, like shareholder foundations, governance in the Nordics, for example, like companies like Open Classroom, who became in France leaders all over the world in education and a very different type of model. So you need to think about different type of business models, but actually you are not going against society or the planet. I love to quote the example of Reed Hastings saying that my main competitor is sleep. So Netflix's main competitor is sleep, which you can see is kind of a misalignment between my own economical interest and like just health of your country. And so it's really important to think now about, and I believe Europe's chance is to think that way and to really do the leapfrog in saying we're not going to follow just the classic digital transformation. What we're going to do is go to the step and one step forward in saying what we need to build is the sustainable digital sovereignty. I think I'm done.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marie. We'll surely have many other questions rising from your intervention. I'm just giving the floor to Carina Schulz. So you're head of the European Affairs at SAP, and concretely, I would love to hear you on how should the EU support major European tech firms in the digital field. So we have seen many examples of concrete cases, especially related to 5G for the past few years. But more globally, how can the EU support those tech and digital firms? So thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for organizing this panel. It's a really, really important topic. I will try to be essentially complementary to what was said before by my fellow panelists. Try not to be too repetitive, and obviously also leave some time for Q&A. But very briefly, to give the context for my short intervention, SAP is an IT company, a software company. We're headquartered in Germany, but we are essentially a global player. And it would be great if my remarks can be seen in that perspective, in that light. First of all, you asked about, what is important for European companies, what we are looking for, and we certainly already heard a lot on that from Thibault. I think one key aspect really for us is that we avoid further fragmentation of the market, that we really try at an EU level to align forces, especially in new technologies. We heard high performance computing, but also obviously in digital infrastructure. So really very important to continue building the European digital market to allow, for companies, especially also smaller companies, to grow in our home turf. Maybe to mention a couple of business initiatives that are also going in the same direction. You certainly heard about Gaia X and also the data spaces. These are initiatives where businesses are coming together, trying to join forces, and in that context, especially to address the dependencies we currently see in cloud computing, for example. So there are a lot of initiatives underway to achieve digital growth, sovereignty, and independence. But as we have heard before, we also want to make sure that this doesn't come at the expense of our European values. And in this context, I wanted to mention one more initiative that we find are very important here, and these are regulatory sandboxes. We think that they're a very modern and suitable instrument to establish a dialogue between, the different actors in the field, innovators, key stakeholders, data protection authorities, academics, members of civil society. And this is a way to really come together, to exchange views in a safe environment, innovate, share perspectives, and as I said, get a measured perspective on European values while ensuring that we have developments in technology and innovative approaches. So I wanted to especially mention this and to borrow a couple of words from Marie to say, to build the champions and the role models of tomorrow, especially for new technologies. That was an important aspect for us that I wanted to mention. Very briefly, to come back to artificial intelligence, we've heard about that today already. We think that the proposed AI regulation is certainly a key element of the EU digital market that was missing, and we very much welcome the proposal. But having said that, we think it is essential that we also understand what is the regulatory framework that already exists, and that we ensure that this aligns really with, existing data protection legislation, consumer protection, product liability, and all other relevant frameworks that we have already established in the EU. And this is really crucial to ensure legal certainty for companies, because this is key. Then also to go back to what Thibault mentioned before, skills and digital experts, very key for us, very important, and we think it's really key to have also close collaborations with universities to ensure we prepare. One other aspect I wanted to mention, also in the context of what Marie said before, that many of the developments are international. We are talking about the EU digital sovereignty, but we shouldn't forget that we should also thrive to be global players. And in that context, we remain in an interconnected world, and the free flow of data is important. Having said that, obviously within the limits of especially European data protection legislation, but nevertheless, it is really a prerequisite for businesses operating internationally. So also to borrow the words of instilling a culture of digital diplomacy in this respect, we really have to keep the global playing field on the radar to remain an economic power and to ensure we also achieve less dependencies and independence and sovereignty in the EU. So that was a bit of a tour de force. I stop here and looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Gloria. So you've been quite concise. So I think we'll now open the Q&A session. I perhaps start with a general reflection and question. The four of you have mentioned in your respective talks the challenge of education to try to let's frame it this way, to create, to build, and to reinforce a sort of general European cyber / digital and so on education. How concretely can we move forward in this respect? What should the EU, what should the member states do in this respect to compete with external players and especially it is dealing with our topic today to assert its own path. So I don't know if any of you want to start in this education question. I think this is a key challenge. Say yes, perhaps Dragos Timoras.
Hi, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
It's a very good question. I'm actually quite concerned myself with this issue of education and the impact of new technologies on that. I think there are two discussions here, at least two, two obvious ones, and maybe one or two which are less obvious. The first one is indeed, how do we prepare the education systems of tomorrow for the transformation of the economy, society, and so on and so forth. And it's about the new competences and how do we instill these new competences into the children of today and as they go into schooling for the years to come. This is where we need to start creating partnerships between the regulators, the policymakers, and the industry, because the first thing to do is to map out, in fact, the jobs of tomorrow. We have to understand how digitalization, how the new technologies will influence, in fact, the change in the labor markets of 10 years from now or 15 years from now. See, in fact, how the jobs of 15 years from now will look like and the kind of competences that will be required for that. And then start adapting the educational systems of today to meet those expectations, that needs for those skills and competences 15 years from now. That in itself, as daunting as it may sound, sorry for the bell ring, this is us being called for the plenary session here in European Parliament. But again, as important as it may sound, it is in fact overpassed by the need to also think and design programs for those that are in the labor market today. For me, this is an equally challenging task of readapting and reskilling those that are today employed and who are seeing, as we speak, accelerated, as Thibault was saying at the beginning, very much accelerated by the pandemic. They see their jobs transforming. So the job that 1 year from now looked in a certain way for certain categories of citizens are certainly already looking very different today and will continue to change and evolve in the years to come. So again, apart from thinking on how we are going to train and skill up the children that maybe are already digitally native and that might find it easier to adapt to this digital transformation. For many of us adults already, and which are working in different areas of economies already today, for us, the challenge is even greater. So again, coming to the tools, we have to also realize that we have the challenge of not having a lot of competences in the educational area at the EU level. So we will have to be creative, innovative in how we play the EU scale versus the national competences, in trying to instill a coherent strategy, both for the initial education, but also for the ongoing education of our society.
Thank you very much. I know that Mr. Thibaut Kleiner has to leave in a couple of minutes. So perhaps if you have, Mr. Kleiner, if you have a final remark based on that particular question or another aspect you want to stress, please go. I think the time is nearly running out for you. I'm not sure your sound is on. Okay, just the time that you put headphones. Okay, all right. We still can't hear you. Our technical colleagues will tackle that. Another aspect struck me during our talk, and being a moderator also implies in some way playing the devil's advocate. All of you stress the central dimension of values, of defending European values, and I, of course, totally agree. And stressing some past initiatives in data, so the GDPR, which was debated abroad and far abroad, including in some countries, in some authoritarian countries, including China. You mentioned also recent initiatives in AI at the EU level, and so on and so on. But the question I would ask you is at the same time very simple and I think extremely difficult to answer, but I try. How can we reconcile the defense of values, of European values, and the rationality of power in some way? So how can a possible future EU digital envoy or ambassador or etc. Can intricate these two dimensions? So first of all, the values we share and we want to project and to defend, and on the other way, that we are living in a very contentious world, and in which external powers, the US and now especially China, want to increase their own influence and grip in some way. So I don't know if any of you want to take this difficult question.
I can do that. If you want me to start. Can you hear me?
Please. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? So I think first of all, we should realize, we are trying to find this third way, right, of achieving both, having growth, innovation, and keeping our European values at the same time. I think as a first step, we should consider that there are some developments that we would just simply not accept in Europe. For example, what is currently very much discussed in the AI context is social scoring. We see this in certain countries like China. This is a development which would absolutely not be acceptable in the EU. So to a certain extent, we have to really acknowledge that some technological developments are just not for us. But having said that, at the same time, we also don't want to just see the developments happening elsewhere, and then we are just going to be the consumers and are going to import them into the EU. So it's really key to find the right balance to allow for companies and the business to innovate, while at the same time be very clear about what are the no-go areas. And this is exactly why I mentioned the regulatory sandboxes before, because this is really a way of experimenting while drawing the lines of where we say this is an area where we are not going to go. But at the same time, I also mentioned before that we should be looking at the global playing field, and we should have the ambition to continue to thrive for not only European champions, but really global champions. And this is why we need to keep the global collaboration in mind as well. But I think going forward, it should be possible to find a third way for us where we say, we keep an eye on growth. We are not going to stifle innovation. This is also why I mentioned that it's crucial to have a balanced regulatory framework, which is protecting the values while letting companies innovate and grow. But at the same time, we also have to face the fact that there are some developments that are not going to be acceptable in a European context. We just need to really work hard to find the right balance here.
Thank you very much. Anyone wishes to build on Corina's comment? I'm thinking about another questions which is quite directly tied to the previous one. So I don't know if someone wants to react, or yeah, perhaps Marie at first, and after Mr. Tulaj.
Sure. I think there's different things. We need to experiment, and experiment means, and I see how difficult it is in finance, for example, it means that we're not going to reproduce the past. And in finance, for example, what you see is that you take decisions on data, or you invest where you believe that models in the past has worked before. And if we want to build a new type of performance, because we're saying it's not going to be only around profit, it's also going to be around making the world sustainable, so having a positive impact on it, but also having a fair society. And this is part of building our European values. Then how do you optimize on these three dimensions when we're used to optimizing only on one? Well, you experiment. And that means you're ready to take risks that were not taken before, and to build new types of models, and as well as top as when you're building these models, you also want to be able to evaluate them. So what did we actually have in terms of performance on the society? What goals did we achieve? Where did we want to go? And what exactly has been done? And if we do that, and if we frame not only the role models, but also the indicators or the metrics that we that can say this is a success, and that can say this is the best practice that we're building and that are making this a success, it's going to work. So it's not only, I agree with Corina that we need this experimentation sandbox, but it's not only on regulation, it's also that it's about where we put the money, what type of companies we want to build, how do we evaluate them in terms of the impact they have, and what knowledge do we get out of that, and how can it help other companies, and how can we build the complete ecosystem? Because one company in itself, it's never going to be resilient. You need to build industries, you need to build ecosystems. And so how can we not think about building one champion, but really building an ecosystem that can together be resilient and together think about it? So not thinking about how can we make a company as big as possible, but how can we build an ecosystem that is sovereign, because it actually is built on common grounds, common data, common resources, common knowledge, whatever that is making it stronger. And that means that we can actually be strong from an economical standpoint, and not by just regulation laws, but also because we do have power, because consumers have followed as well. And this, I will end with that in saying that there's actually a very big disruption potential, because this is what people want, at least some part of the people, and we can take a lot of market share by building this.
Thank you very much, Marie. Just before hearing to Duraj, I'm just adding another layer to my question for you to answer. You mentioned in your previous talk the importance of reaching a sort of partnership or even a sort of consensus with the US in relation to all the digital field topics. But how to deal concretely, and I insist on the concretely, with China on all these aspects?
Well, I think the answer, although the question is certainly complex and difficult, I think the answer is rather simple. I will actually start with what Maria and also Corina said earlier. And in general, there is that saying that you cannot do a strong foreign policy without a very strong internal policy. In other words, you can't claim a moral high ground, neither towards your partners or towards your competitors, if you are empty-handed. What I want to say with that is that before we figure out how to address the issue of digital sovereignty and generally the strategic play of new technologies on the global stage, we have to make sure that we get as strong as we can, let's say, at home, in our backyard. And here we need everything that my fellow panelists have said before. We need to innovate, we need to be creative, we need to boost our economies, we need to invest in education, we need to invest in research. We need to do all that so that we become competitive, so that we stand very strongly on our feet when it comes to what we and what our economies represent in this digital transformation. And as we do that, and while we do that, then we can take our normative model, then we can take our values, our principles, and we can go and use them as part of the conversation that we have, first of all, with our partners, and then again with our competitors. And when we address competitors such as China, we cannot have the arrogance, I'm sorry to say that very bluntly, we cannot have the arrogance of doing it all as Europeans. As great as our normative model might prove to be, and still the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as the English say, so we still have to see as part of the negotiations that we'll have what will be the end product. But even if the end product will be a beautiful piece of legislation on AI or on data or on Digital Services Act or on Digital Markets Act, that model, if we want to impose it as a standard or use it as a standard or as an influential piece of modeling for tomorrow's society and economy, we have to play along again with our partners. And then, for the likes of China, Russia, or the others, we will leave very little choice and very little room for maneuver. Because we are all playing on a global market, we are all playing on a global scene, and if you manage to capture as much of that scene, as much of that market with your own model, and that you manage to make that model attractive because of what it represents, because of values that are underneath it, but also because of the kind of economic products and effects that you can show it has, then again, the way you deal with your competitors becomes almost a natural byproduct of what you have managed to achieve, both in terms of your economical output and of your normative model. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have something like 3 or 4 minutes maximum before closing the debate. So what I would ask you is the same question, and perhaps 1 minute maximum per panelist. My question would be about the civil society organization. What place, what role should we grant to these individuals and organizations? How could they influence, and how should they influence, in the right sense of the word, the debate about the major digital stakes of our times? Yeah, it sounds quite generic, but actually I think it's very concrete, and it's also closely tied with the values aspect you have been all mentioning before. So who wants to take it first? Corinna, perhaps, or Marie?
Marie, do you want to go first?
You go.
Okay, I think that they really play a key role in the current debate, absolutely, because without trust that you achieve by through society, in society, we cannot thrive. So they certainly have a key role to play. I have to say that I've seen a lot of involvement and activity lately on all the files I was working on in the digital space. So I think they already have a very considerable seat at the table, which is the right thing. And I can only say that I would encourage all the different stakeholders I mentioned before, and I would certainly also add universities to that equation as well, to be part of the discussion and come to the table and be as active as they were before, even more active.
Thank you, Corinna. Perhaps Marie, or yeah.
Yeah, I believe in building ecosystems. And I mean, I've built my own company by saying we will be ecosystem governance and have all the stakeholders at the board, basically. So I really think we need to have everybody around the table, and this will build the right type of power that we need to really build sovereignty. As I was saying, in the same way that I don't think you can build an aligned company in a misaligned system. We need, if we want to build sovereignty, it cannot be done by one particular place. It has to be done globally. And so we're all interlinked. Using this not as a constraint, but as a strength, I believe is a challenge we have. And I think it will work if we think forward and not if we try to just run behind. So making a bold assumption of what exactly we want to build, of setting that destination and aiming not at reproducing the past, but at achieving this goal will be key. And for that, we will need everybody to be involved. And I think it's important to add, as Corinna was saying, universities as well, but it's people coming from all these different places.
Thank you so much. Perhaps Mr. Tudorach, or what I might ask you at this stage of the panel, it's a very concise, very brief words about. I mean, one message you want to convey to our audience. We have spent 1 hour 15 minutes together this afternoon, and perhaps you have one final word to stress before closing the seminar.
Well, I'll start very quickly for 1 minute with the role of civil society, because I think it's a very important question. First of all, to say that I think they have already played a very important role. If I look at many of the proposals that we have on the table from the Commission since last year, many had quite a solid consultation behind them. if I can only think of the artificial intelligence regulation, the whole 8-9 months of consultation around the white paper have meant, I think, quite a lot in terms of the quality of the final product, and certainly civil society, think tanks, the academia have influenced quite a lot with the ideas, the proposal of the Commission. I will also say something else. I think the civil society can have a very active ongoing role. Legislating technology, such as artificial intelligence, for example, but everything else related to digital, I think will require very novel normative processes. Sandboxing was mentioned several times in this conversation, but also policy prototyping is something very important. What it means is that somehow you have to make sure that your legislative instrument stays alive. And how does it stay alive? By actually staying constantly connected to what happens around you. And that is where the civil society can play a very important role in bringing new input from society, bringing new ideas, the effect, the way people, societies understand the impact of this legislation and of these technologies. And therefore, and then by means of these policy prototyping and sandboxing, you can actually adapt legislation and adapt your normative framework as you go along. And I think this is a very important piece. I see it in the AI regulation as a possibility, and I think it's a welcome approach. And for 30 more seconds, a last thought on digital sovereignty. This is the topic of today. I think it's essential that we don't think of sovereignty as an end, as the actual objective. It is not, or at least it should not be. It is a means to an end. The end remains the prosperity of our citizens and of our societies. It means the security of our citizens and our societies. It means sustainability of our development, so on and so forth. And sovereignty can be a means for us to achieve those ends. As long as we understand that, and we understand this sovereignty and quest for autonomy that we see in our political rhetoric over the last few years, I think we're on the right path. Thank you.
Thank you. A final comment or takeaway by you, Marie and Corinna?
I couldn't agree more with what Dragos just said, is that we actually, and I started by this, I mean, I've been participating to the digital transformation for 20 years. I've been suffering from the fact that there were no destination to that transformation, and that I think a way out is actually to really build a North Star. What exactly do we want to achieve? And how do we embrace digital technologies and sovereignty as a way of going there? But we need to get out of this idea that technology or sovereignty in itself is a goal. It's not. And so not forget that it has to be at the service of something greater than this, and which is basically, as you were saying, the prosperity of our societies and the type of society that we actually want to reach and build for our children.
Thanks, Mary. And perhaps Corinna, you have the final word before coming to an end.
I'll be very brief because there's really almost nothing to add. I couldn't agree more with what was said before. Just to say that, as we said, digital sovereignty is not the end game. We also should not lose sight, as I said before, of the global dimension, and we shouldn't, get lost in navel gazing. I would say, but keep the greater perspective in mind here.
Thank you very much. Before giving the floor to Jessica for the final conclusion, final sort of wrap up in a few words to say that what we have dealt with during this hour and 15 minutes together, that actually it's a very complicated topic because it's perhaps one of the most sensitive in the way that it intricates very closely the external and internal dimension. And for a sort of bloc like the European Union, it's a particularly tricky challenge, but I think one of the most fascinating to deal with in this complex world. So thank you to all to all panelists. Mr. Kleiner had to leave at 5 o'clock, so we unfortunately didn't hear him at the end of the session. But thanks very much to him as well, and thank you to all of you here for your very substantive words. So thank you once again, and let's continue the talk in other formats.
Many thanks, Julien, for moderating this session, and thank you to the 4 speakers for this very insightful debate. So, as you mentioned, this event is now coming to an end, and I would like once again to extend a warm thank you to all the speakers who we have heard today for the quality of the discussions. Thank you really for taking the time to discuss this important topic with us. A big thank you as well to all the participants for your active listening as well. We hope you enjoyed the debates as much as we did. And I also like to take this opportunity to thank once again the Office of the French Ambassador for Digital Affairs, Henri Verdier, for supporting this event. And of course, many thanks again to Laura and Julien for the amazing moderation job. As far as we are concerned, the written proceedings of this event will be published on our website in the coming weeks. It will be publicly available, and we will make sure to share it with you once they come out. And you will also be able to watch a replay of the conference very soon. And finally, today's discussions will feed into the reflections of Renaissance Numérique's working group, which is dedicated to European digital sovereignty, which Nicholas mentioned earlier in his introduction. The findings and recommendations of this working group will be published as a report this fall, so stay tuned for that. Have a great evening and a good week. Bye-bye.